Hey everybody, Ian from Novel Music here, and in this video we're going to take a look at Travelogue. It's a 4-voice generative music sequencer that has a lot of functionality packed into it, so let's take a look at its features. What is a generative sequencer? Well, in the case of Travelogue, we're taking a random noise source and through all the parameters throughout the device, sculpting the sound, changing it, turning it into a melody, turning it into a chord progression, a passage of counterpoint, a drone. Lots of different possibilities here. And you'll find as you tweak these parameters, you'll learn how to arrive at a sound that you're looking for while still enjoying the randomness of the device itself. We have a UI that's fairly simple. When you open the device up, you're presented with the shape control panel, which is the most often used panel of the 6, and the XY pad. The way that the XY pad works is as we move the node into a corner, let's say with voice A here, now we only hear voice A. If we move it to voice B in the corner here, then we only hear voice B. When it's in the center, we're getting an equal chance of the different voices being triggered. We have this lock down here. Many novel music devices have this. When it's all the way to the left, we're continuously tapping into that random noise source to produce the music. As we slide it to the right, we keep the previous random values based on whatever step we're on, and we have repetition. So part of working with this device is playing around with the position of the node on the XY pad and tweaking the parameters. We'll start with the rate here. As you increase this parameter, the notes will move faster, creating all kinds of different rhythms. Of course, turning it the other way will give you much slower note values. To the right of rate, we have the gate, or the length of the notes. Beyond 100%, we start having will be the effect of the sustain pedal held down on a piano. Density controls the overall occurrence of notes. So if we turn this down, we're having some more rests thrown in, not so continuous, the music itself. All the way down, of course, we won't hear anything. Range controls the width of how many notes out of the scale we're going to use. So when it's at 50%, we can have a full octave of the current key and scale. At 100%, we'll get 2 octaves. And of course, values less than 50 will be less than an octave, all the way down to a single note. The offset parameter controls the starting and ending note within the range. You can see if we go into negative, it gets lower. If it's positive, we go higher. So it keeps the same shape musically, it's just moving it up or down the scale. At 100%, it's up an octave. At minus 100%, it's down an octave. And then lastly on this panel, we have the expression parameter. This adds little expressive ornaments. The next tab we're going to take a look at is the notes control panel. On this panel, we can control if the output is polyphonic or monophonic. We can turn playback on and off on the device, let MIDI notes through if we want to jam along with the sequencer. And we have our note modes here. The default is scale, so this would be probably the most familiar concept for everyone. You pick a key and you pick a scale. The scales come from Ableton's default 36 scales that are available when you create a new MIDI clip The way the keys work in Travelogue is different than other sequencers. It's not a transpose function. So here I'm in C major. If I change the key to G major, note that the notes didn't drastically shift down or up, but rather we changed our F natural into an F sharp. Now let's move it into A major. Same thing. While it certainly changed, we didn't drastically move the notes up or down. Instead, the C's became C sharps, the G's became G sharps, F's are F sharps. There's also an arpeggiator mode. So in this mode, it's taking my incoming MIDI input from my keyboard. And I've got latch set up so that I don't have to hold the keys down, rather I just strike them and it holds those values. But basically this allows Travelogue to act as a sort of generative arpeggiator in addition to being a generative sequencer. Lastly, there's a fixed mode which assigns a note for voice A, B, C, and D that will not change. And this is particularly useful if you'd like to use Travelogue to drive a drum machine or have just a very specific set amount of fixed pitches. Let's just dial in a couple different notes here. So now these notes won't change. However, we can still do some shaping to them. The rate, for instance, the density, the gate length, and some other parameters as well. Accent introduces larger MIDI velocities, sort of that act as a harder hit if you're thinking of an analogy of playing a drum. This parameter is only useful if you've got your MIDI instrument set up to receive velocity and receiving it in a way where it impacts the actual amplitude, the final output of the device. The velocity parameter determines how much of the XY pad's position influences the output velocity of your MIDI instrument. So if I have this all the way up and I'm in the corner here like I am with A, let's go ahead and lock this. As I move to B, you notice that A becomes a lot quieter and B becomes quite a bit louder. If I have the note in the center, the effect is voices come and go in a way where each voice feels more like a solo when it is triggered. If I turn this parameter down, note that now they all play at the same velocity, no matter how close I am to the different corners. The last parameter to look at on this control panel is bend, which introduces microtonal inflections. The higher this parameter is set, the more frequent the microtonal shifts. Over on the Motion tab, this is where we can control various rhythmic parameters such as swing and reset. You can see here I have reset already set to 2 beats. These numbers here represent how many beats in quarter notes, but it goes all the way to random and then at the very end bar. So if I have my bar set to 5/8, for instance, then the device will reset. What happens on a reset is that we take the 4 voices and set them back to their first step. Combining the lock all the way to the right with the reset parameter is how you'll achieve the most predictable repetitions using Travelogue. Let's go to a 3 pattern. The start parameter controls where the 4 voices start on which step. There are 32 possible steps. If we started on step 32, for instance, then the sequencer wraps around. It goes to 32, then 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, depending on the step length. Above these parameters, we have the path controls. By default, the path is turned off. If you click on the path menu here, you have a variety of choices, including simple shapes like rectangles, going up and down the x-axis, the y-axis, diagonally, a triangle shape, the zigzag. Let's take a look at a rectangle shape here. Now, when I hit play, the node will automatically move across the XY pad in this pattern. So it's a way of sort of automating some control, allowing you to play around with other shaping parameters while this moves around. It also comes in handy for the modulation section of the device. You can control the speed. This is given in quarter notes. But if you prefer, you can also operate this at a certain frequency in hertz. The path can be set to reset by toggling this button here, so when the reset happens, we'll actually jump back to the path, as you see here. I'll turn that off for now. We have different directions that are possible: reverse, forward, reverse, and random. Over in the Voices control panel, we can determine which voices will be active in a sequence. We also can control how many steps each voice will have in its own sequence. So let's go to voice A here. Let's lock it. That's eight steps right now. We can bring this down to 3, to 2, which happens to be the same note here. There's 2 notes, and then 1, all the way up to 32. So if you want a very long, evolving melodic strand, then you can have up to 32 steps. Here we also can control the octave of each voice, up to 36 semitones up and down. The default setting is to have A and B set right in the center, C and D down an octave to create a sort of pseudo bass. The spacing tab is a control panel that allows us to further refine how the shape panel works. So, for instance, let's set this up so that it's a sequence that we can hear repeating. Great. Now, let's play with the rate spacing parameter. As I turn this to the left, note that voices A and B are moving faster while C and D are moving slower. You can do the same thing with the gate. Let's make A and B shorter, so we'll move the dial to the right to make C and D longer while A and B get shorter. This panel is reading from the current settings of the shape parameters and applying this spacing after the fact. When these dials are set in the middle, which is the default setting, they have no effect until they are turned either to the left or right. So some very powerful possibilities with this. Lastly, we have the map control panel. This is what allows us to map to any parameter in Ableton Live that allows itself to be mapped. Here I'm using this synth. I'm going to map to the filter cutoff, and I'm going to map to the release stage of the ADSR envelope. This is how I'm going to introduce you now to the mod tab. So you see up here we have pad. We go to mod. And depending on which control panel page we're on, you'll see there are at least 6. In the case of voices, there are actually 8 parameters that can be modulated. Each target is listed there on the left column. In the center, then, we have our source that we can select. So for map 1, the source I'm going to choose is going to be the x-axis. And for map 2, I'm going to choose the y-axis. And while I'm at it, why don't I go ahead and map the reverb that I have going here. And I'm going to put that to voice A. Let's leave the depth at 100% for all these for now. As I move this around now, you hear the sound change. Yeah, as I move it to the left, I get kind of this washy sound, and to the right, a much tighter, drier sound and brighter. If I pull this filter down even more, this represents the lowest value. And on the mod tab, the depth represents the highest value it can go to. So 100% meaning it'll open up the filter all the way to 20 kilohertz. At this point, you probably are thinking it would be great to apply one of our path shapes, which I'm going to do now. So I'm going to go for zigzag, moving it fairly slowly. Now I'd like to set the rate up to be modulated as well. So now I'm on the shape control panel, I go to mod, I see my targets here, I'm going to go to rate, and I'm going to go with LFO 2, which by default is a square wave. I'm going to speed up the square wave. So the LFO toggle button here takes you to the 3 onboard LFOs that are included with Travelogue. They have the functionality that you would expect with an LFO. It can be turned on and off, of course. They can be set to reset when a reset trigger happens here from the motion tab. We have various standard shapes for the LFOs. We can set their speed in quarter note beats or more traditionally in hertz using frequency. We also can smooth out the shape of the LFO with the smoothing parameter. If I go to gate, I'm going to select LFO 1. By default, the modulation occurs above the current value. That's when it's set in a positive range. It's unipolar, it's not bipolar. As you see, as I bring this down, the amount of modulation being applied is becoming less. And as I move it in the negative direction, you'll see now the modulation's occurring below the current value of the setting. Now let's take a look at the preset functionality of Travelogue. If you click on the lock, it takes you to the preset section of the pad here. At the bottom, we have 8 possible preset slots, and we can copy presets and delete presets. We also have an interpolation mode, which I'll show you in a moment. Now let's get some music that we want to store first. preset here. And let's lock it. Okay, I like that. If I want to store this, I just click on preset 1. That little flash there indicates that it's been stored. I'm going to copy this and use it as the basis for another preset. Okay, I'm going to use that. Okay, great. I'm going to use that. So I click on 2 and then that's stored. Let's create a few more presets. Copy that. Okay, I like that. I'll store that. So I have these 3 presets now. In the interpolation mode, we click on this hamburger menu, and depending on where the from and to parameters are set, we can nice and smoothly interpolate between the presets. Now I'm going to go from 1 to 3. Besides being able to go through presets 1 through 8, there's also a setting in the 2 section called All, which allows us to go through all 8 presets. Now you'll notice that if I go a little bit further, I'm going to end up at the default settings. That's because we didn't store anything in presets 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Included with Travelogue is a companion device called Destination, which allows us to receive the different voices being generated by Travelogue into any MIDI track in the live set. So I've actually set it up to receive voices A, B, C, and D on 4 different tracks with 4 different instruments. I'm going to mute the synth that we've been using. And now we're going to play around with the device sending the MIDI out to 4 different tracks. And that's Travelogue. I hope you enjoy using this device. It is a lot of fun to get lost in it, creating music that is coming from noise of all places. but turning it into something that you might find very useful for your own music making and for your enjoyment. Please subscribe to this channel and stay tuned for more videos. Thanks so much.